True Crime All the Time Unsolved is brought to you by Diamond Art Club. Diamond painting is a new craft hobby that's like paint by number, but with colorful resin rhinestone. My whole family loves it. Right now, you can save 20% off your first purchase with Diamond Art Club. Go to diamondartclub.com and use the promo code UNSOLVED. That's diamondartclub.com, promo code UNSOLVed for 20% off your first purchase.
Jennifer Harris disappeared from Bonham, Texas on Mother's Day 2002. The secrets in the Jennifer Harris case have been hidden for 20 years.
When someone disappears, you have to look at who would benefit from their disappearance.
What happened to Jennifer Harris, and who is responsible for her death? Coming May 10th, Final Days on Earth, Season 2, The Life and Death of Jennifer Harris. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 268 of the True Crime All the Time Unsolved podcast. I'm Mike Ferguson, and with me, as always, is my partner in true crime, Mike Gibson. Gibby, how are you?
Hey, man, I'm doing well. How about you?
I'm doing well. As well as possibly I can be.
You are as well.
Let's go ahead and give our Patreon shout-outs. We had Randy Crandall.
What's going on, Randy?
Ann Hammonds.
Hey, Ann.
No Likey.
No Likey.
Jim Fox.
Hey, Jim.
Sandy Reichard.
What's up, Sandy?
Logan Bobo.
Well, thank you, Logan.
Crystal Pomales jumped out at our highest level.
Awesome, Crystal.
Gypsy.
Hey, Gypsy.
Aaron Rojas.
Appreciate that, Aaron.
Teresa Summers.
Hey, Teresa.
Happy Place Planning.
Well, thank you, Planning.
Frith Veitch.
Well, gotta have a little frith.
Ramona Pfeiffer jumped out at our highest level.
What's going on, Pfeiffer?
Kay Jones.
Well, appreciate that, Jones.
Mikey K.
What's up, Kay?
Ricky Suzanne Martinez jumped out at our highest level.
Well, thank you, Ricky Suzanne.
Wendy.
Hey, good old Wendy.
Carla B jumped out at our highest level.
Could be Cardi B sister.
Could be. Jasmine Pusateri.
Well, what's up, Jasmine?
And last but not least, Kevin Roberts.
Hey, thanks, Kevin.
So we appreciate that new support. And then if we go back into the vault, this week we selected Jennifer Stoddard.
Well, that's awesome, Jennifer.
So we appreciate all that Patreon support. And then on PayPal, we had donations from Lynn Wilson.
Thanks, Lynn.
Jackie Fage.
Well, thank you, Fage.
And Becky Dela Paz.
Ooh, Dela Paz.
So thanks to everyone. Gibbs, we had a Patreon merch winner for May, and that was Elisa Barnes.
Hey, I haven't won that yet.
No, and you won't.
Well, that's right. There's rules, aren't there?
You're not, yeah, you don't. You're not actually a Patreon member.
Oh, yeah. So I'm forbidden to win.
You're barred.
I'm barred. Okay. Well, hey, good job, Alyssa.
We have an episode out on TCAT right now on Carlton Dotson. So this is a case, that involved college athletics, Baylor basketball.
Yeah.
One athlete murdering another athlete, but also, a bunch of corruption gets uncovered. There's a lot going on in this true crime case.
So if you haven't listened, jump over there and go listen.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, buddy. Are you ready to get into this episode of True Crime All the Time Unsolved?
I'm ready.
We're talking about the murders of victims who were targeted by a serial killer who came to be known as Bible John. From 1968 to 1969, 3 women in their mid-20s to early 30s were murdered in the Scottish industrial city of Glasgow. Their names were Patricia Docker, Jemima McDonald, and Helen Puttock. Now, separately, they all had gone out for a night of dancing and socializing before they were murdered. Their cases had many similarities, including the fact that they were all mothers. They were also all brunettes. The women had all been savagely beaten and raped before being strangled to death, and all in the same area. So I would call those similarities, Gibbs.
I would too.
I think you have women around the same age, right? Same age range,
right?
Similar ages. The manner of death is similar. They're all found in basically the same area. I think you would, as law enforcement, have to believe that there are some connections.
Yeah.
Between the three.
And we're going to learn about a few other similarities. And one of them's kind of strange.
The body of each victim was found not long after they failed to return home. The sister of one of the victims was believed to have been the only confirmed witness sighting, later telling police the man who killed her sister quoted extensively from the Bible during their conversations on the night in question. This is what has led to this mystery killer being dubbed Bible John. The murders resulted in one of the biggest investigations in Scottish history. Over the years, several persons of interest have been identified, including another serial killer, but no one has ever been charged, and the killer's identity remains hotly debated to this day.
It's a pretty popular unsolved case. I mean, it's been out there since the 60s.
And there's some strange facets
Yes.
to this case, and a lot of times that is what draws people in, and then they get invested, right, in what's going on. They might even start researching it themselves, become kind of what we always call armchair detectives, and really try to put the pieces together themselves. 25-year-old nurse Patricia Docker was born in the early 1940s and grew up with her parents, John and Pauline, in the Langside area of Glasgow. In 1963, Patricia married a Royal Air Force pilot named Alex. The couple welcomed a son in 1964, but by 1968, they were estranged. Patricia and her 4-year-old son moved back home to live with her parents. According to the Scottish Herald, she worked at Mearnskirk Hospital in Renfrewshire, west of the city. On the evening of February 22nd, 1968, Patricia told her parents she was going to the Majestic Ballroom Dance Hall on Hope Street, and they agreed to babysit their grandson. When Patricia didn't come home that night, her parents assumed she'd stayed over at a friend's house.
Remember when you used to like to go to the ballrooms and dance?
I was a ballroom dancer.
Yeah.
At one point in my life.
I think they called you Lefty.
It's not something that I talk about a lot, but there are a couple of things here, Gibbs, that jump out at me. You know, first of all, it's amazing to have family close by when you have young children.
Sure.
Because they're almost always willing to help out with watching the child or the children, so, you know, you can go out and do something. And then the second thing is Patricia doesn't come home that night, but her parents weren't overly worried. You know, they assumed that she'd stayed overnight at a friend's house. I get that. You know, maybe she had a little bit too much to drink and you know, didn't want to catch a ride all the way back. I don't know what the particulars are.
Yeah, and this was before we had cell phones, right? So it's not like you're going to pick up a phone and say, "Hey, Mom, I won't be home till tomorrow."
Well, it's not like you're going to be able to reach out to her.
Right.
You don't know where to call. You know, that's the one thing that cell phones do. They give you kind of a fixed number, essentially wherever you are, for people to get a hold of you. Before that, if somebody didn't know exactly where you were, there's no reason to try to call somewhere because you don't know where you're calling.
Right. It's funny, you talk about that a little bit off the subject, but I heard a comedian the other day say relationships back in the 60s and 70s were so much better because when the husband went to work, or the wife, or both parties, from the 8 o'clock in the morning until they came back together at 6 o'clock, they didn't talk to each other. So they had all this time, you know, to have some conversations and stuff, you know. But today, you probably talk to your spouse over a dozen times before you even get home from work.
Or you're both working from home.
Yeah.
And so, you know, nighttime rolls around. What else do you have to say in some instances?
You're all talked out.
Exactly. On the morning of February 23rd, a man on his way to fetch his car from a secure parking garage in Carmichael Place in the Battlefield area of Glasgow found Patricia's naked body. She was lying face up in the garage's doorway, not far from her home. One of her shoes was found near her body, but there was little physical evidence at the crime scene. All of Patricia's belongings were missing. her clothing, her handbag, and her watch. Her father was the one who made the formal identification of her body.
Which we always say, we know that's got to be tough.
Oh, it's got to be, one of the worst things that a parent ever has to do. Now, some reports state that Patricia's clothing was never found, but according to the Daily Record newspaper, her dress, coat, and handbag were found by the river by a police dive team, and her watch was found in a pool of water not far from the crime scene. And this is something that you and I battle on a routine basis. As you're researching a case, sources often vary on the information. And, much more so as you go back in time. But we just had this on TCAT on a story that was just about 20 years old. There was a lot of information that conflicted depending on what source you were looking at. A postmortem examination confirmed that Patricia had been killed. Shortly after leaving the dance hall, she had been sexually assaulted and sustained significant blunt force trauma to the face and head. She was then strangled to death with a ligature, which police thought could have been a belt.
Sounds like a very brutal murder.
Yeah, I think when you get into the area of blunt force trauma to the face and head, and then obviously, strangulation with some type of ligature, whether it was a rope, a belt, I think they could probably tell the difference between a rope and belt, judging by the marks on the neck. But Either way, I agree with you. Very brutal. It was also reported that Patricia was on her period when she died, and her sanitary pad was found near her body. Police conducted a door-to-door search in the area where Patricia's body was found, but no one heard anything unusual the night before, except for one resident who said she heard a woman scream, "Leave me alone."
But I'm guessing she didn't go out and check on that scream.
Well, this is something that I think plays into a number of unsolved cases, right? A neighbor or, somebody nearby hears something, but it's always, what do they make of that?
Right.
Also, if you think something dangerous is going on, do you want to go out and investigate it and put yourself potentially in harm's way? My thought is, okay, leave me alone. Depending on the pitch and what it sounded like, could just be two people kind of play fighting or, messing around with each other.
Yeah.
Or it could be a real cry for help, but it's not a gunshot. So there is something that's a little bit open to interpretation. As police retraced Patricia's last movements, they discovered that she hadn't gone to the Majestic Ballroom for some reason. Instead, she went to another dance hall, the Barrowland Ballroom, which held an over 25 night for singles on the night that Patricia died. It wasn't until several days into the investigation that police discovered Patricia had gone to the Barrowland and not the Majestic. And it's a big deal because I think just based off what she told her family, they assumed that she had gone to the Majestic. So they lost several days worth of valuable time.
Yeah, it had hurt the investigation somewhat.
Investigators theorized Patricia met her killer at the Barrowland before the pair left together. At some point, the killer tried to force himself on Patricia, but she fought back. Then the attacker punched and kicked her in the face as she screamed for help. The killer raped Patricia and strangled her to death before stripping her naked and taking her clothes and handbag. And like you said, Gibbs, this is brutal.
Yeah.
I mean, just the description of it is absolutely brutal. 32-year-old single mother of three, Jemima McDonald, was born in 1937. She was one of 7 children. She was determined to give her kids the best life possible. According to the blog Old Glasgow Murders, Jemima experienced violence at the hands of her partners. As a result, she chose to raise her children on her own rather than expose them to a violent home life.
Sometimes that's what you have to do. Kids come first.
Kids come first, and it's not always an easy decision to make, right? You're now a single mother raising 3 kids. You don't have a lot of money. But like we said, determined to give her kids the best life possible. By 1969, Jemima was living in a small 2-room apartment in the suburb of Bridgeton with her kids. She loved attending the Barrowland when she could to get away for a night of dancing and fun.
Yeah, going out for dancing is a good time.
Sure. On August 16th, 1969, Jemima left her 3 children with her sister Margaret while she went out to the Barrowland. But when Jemima didn't come home or make contact, Margaret began to worry. The next day, with no sign of her sister, Margaret heard local rumors that a group of neighborhood children had been overheard talking about finding a body in a rundown apartment building on McKee Street. Margaret went to the abandoned apartment to see if what she had heard was true. I think probably running through her mind, Gibbs, was, is my sister hurt?
Yeah.
Is she out there? Does she need my help? But when Margaret walked inside, her worst nightmare came true. Jemima's lifeless body lay face down on the ground. She was clothed, but her underwear was torn, and her stockings and shoes were lying beside her body.
What a rough discovery for anybody, but especially for your sister.
Yeah, I think we've talked before about, what does it do to someone to find a dead body? And I think a lot of times, most times, that discovery is made by someone who probably doesn't even know the victim. But still, that can't be easy. Now you have a woman who finds her sister dead. So obviously it would just be such a traumatic discovery.
The other thing I found strange was that she heard this rumor. I'm trying to figure out why the police didn't go to this apartment before she got there.
Well, we don't have any indications that the police heard the rumor.
Right.
Or had any knowledge of that information. It sounds like she overheard something and thought, well, I better go check it out. Now, to your point, she could have called the police and asked them to check it out.
Yeah.
But it sounds like she was just so worried about her sister, not thinking she was going to find her murdered, obviously, thinking, I better get over there because she might need my help. The post-mortem examination determined Jemima had been murdered around 30 hours or so before she was found, meaning that she was killed probably not long after leaving the Barrowland to go home. She had been raped and viciously beaten, with the attacker specifically targeting her face. Her killer strangled her with one of her own stockings. Like Patricia Docker, Jemima was also on her period when she was killed, and her sanitary pad was found near her body. So you mentioned it earlier, Gibbs, that there was going to be another kind of strange connection,
right,
with these victims. And this is exactly what you were talking about. Now, could it be a coincidence that 2 women were raped and murdered and happened to be on their period? It could.
Could.
I think the detail that really made it to me seem not a coincidence is the pad being found near the body.
Right.
The description was very similar in both of these cases.
And again, another vicious attack, right?
Sure.
This killer really goes after the victim's face. The previous victim was kicked and punched. This time,
and you have to ask the question, what does that mean? There's a rape. There's a strangulation.
right?
But there's also what seems to be this deliberate targeting of the face with blows, blunt force trauma. Does that mean something?
So is this guy angry with the women, the victims here? Or is he just angry with women in general? And he's taking it out on these victims?
No, it's a good question. And then you kind of dovetail into that. Okay, within that anger, why specifically the face? How does that play in? Police had a lead in Jemima's case. Several eyewitnesses told police that they'd seen her with a young, slender, well-dressed man on the evening in question at the Barrowland. He appeared to be between 25 and 35 years old, was around 6 foot to 6'2", and had neat, short, dark brown hair. He had a strong Glaswegian accent and was heard quoting the Bible. During conversations, Jemima and her companion left the dance hall around 12:40 a.m. According to the Glasgow Evening Times, they were spotted walking towards either Bain Street or Landressy Street, towards Jemima's house, when police conducted door-to-door searches on the street. Where her body was found, one resident recalled hearing a woman screaming on the night in question, but had no idea what time it could have been. Police focused their efforts on the description of the man, last seen with Jemima, and conducted a reenactment of her final known movements. But before they could make much progress, there was another brutal murder under very similar circumstances. True Crime All the Time Unsolved is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Most of you listening right now are probably multitasking. Yep, while you're listening to Gibby and I talk, you're probably also driving, cleaning, exercising, or maybe even grocery shopping. But if you're not in some kind of moving vehicle, there's something else you can be doing right now. Getting an auto quote from Progressive Insurance. It's easy, and you could save money by doing it right from your phone. Drivers who save by switching to Progressive save over $700 on average. And auto customers qualify for an average of 7 discounts. Discounts for having multiple vehicles on your policy, being a homeowner, and more. So just like your favorite podcast, Progressive will be with you 24/7, 365 days a year, so you're protected no matter what. Multitask right now. Quote your car insurance at Progressive.com to join the over 27 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. National annual average insurance savings by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2020 and May 2021. Potential savings will vary. Discounts not available in all states and situations. Hey, TCAT fans, you've heard me talk over the years about things that I do in my downtime. Well, now I have something that I'm doing with the entire family. Diamond painting. It's a new craft hobby that's kind of like paint by numbers, but with colorful resin rhinestone. It's very simple to learn how to do. You just pick up the rhinestones with a magic applicator pen and apply them to a color-coded adhesive canvas. My wife and daughters have been doing these for years, but when they got the ones sent to us by Diamond Art Club, they opened them and said, these are by far the highest level quality diamond painting kits they've ever seen. And now I'm into it. All 4 of us are sitting around the table. We're having fun. We're relaxing, but we're also sharing quality family time. Everything you need to get started is included in each kit and no experience is necessary. It's just a lot of fun. I'm completing a cats and cupcakes one for my oldest daughter. She loves cats. My wife picked out an amazing island themed diamond painting. Sometimes they even release mystery kits, which are diamond paintings with a secret image. So you won't actually know what the design is until you complete it. But hey, we all love a good mystery. Right now, you can save 20% off your first purchase with Diamond Art Club. Go to diamondartclub.com and use the promo code UNSOLVED. That's diamondartclub.com, promo code UNSOLVED for 20% off your first purchase. Cerebral is an online mental health service that offers prescription medication, counseling, and therapy for anxiety, depression, ADHD, insomnia, and more. Cerebral is one of the few services that provides prescription medication online through a licensed provider and ships that medication straight to your door so that you can skip the pharmacy lines. They have an amazing mobile app. So with the Cerebral mobile app, it's just like having your personal care team wherever you are. You can message them and access self-care resources wherever you go. You can connect with your counselor and therapist on your own schedule through your laptop or through the Cerebral mobile app. And because of that, you can always find an area of your home where you're most comfortable. They offer affordable treatments that are about 1/3 the price of traditional therapy, and options are available with or without insurance. And for listeners of this program, you can receive 65% off your first month of medication management and care counseling at cerebral.com/unsolved. Go to cerebral.com/unsolved for 65% off your first month. That's just a total of $30 to get started. Join Cerebral today on their mission to make quality mental health care accessible and affordable for all. 29-year-old mother of 2, Helen Puttock, was lively, outgoing. It was said she had a love for music. She was born around 1940. By 1969, she was living in an apartment on Earl Street with her mother in the neighborhood of Scotstoun. Her husband, George, was in the British Army, and the couple had 2 young sons. George was stationed elsewhere, but returned to Glasgow regularly to see his young family. On October 30th, 1969, Helen told her husband she was going out with her sister Jean to the Barrowland, where Helen loved to dance. After having some drinks at the Trader's Tavern, Helen and Jean continued to the Barrowland. They made the acquaintance of 2 men who didn't know each other, but both gave their names as John. The John who danced with Jean told her that he lived in the Castle Milk area of Glasgow. He later became known as Castle Milk John. But the other man who danced with Helen didn't give out personal details. He was well-spoken, but made no mention of where he lived. Eventually, all 4 people decided to head home, and they left the dance hall. Castle Milk John walked to George Square, where he caught a bus, according to the Glasgow Evening Times. Jean, Helen, and the other John caught a taxi from Glasgow Cross. They decided to drop Jean off first, who lived 20 minutes away in Knightswood. When the cab arrived at Kelso Street, Jean got out and she said goodnight. She watched as the cab continued towards Earl Street and headed towards Scotstoun, where Helen lived, about a 10-minute drive away. When Helen failed to return home, her husband George became worried. The next day, a man walking his dog at the rear of the apartment building where Helen lived discovered her partially naked body beside a drain pipe in the back garden. Her killer had strangled her with one of her stockings, and she suffered severe injuries from being beaten. The contents of her purse were found near her body, but there was no sign of the bag itself. A man's cufflink was also found near her body. There's no doubt Helen put up the fight of her life, Gibbs, against her attacker. This was evidenced by grass stains on her shoes. She even had some on the soles of her feet. As officers scoured the area for clues, they found signs that someone had tried to run up a nearby railway embankment, but had slipped and had fallen or had been dragged back down. So I think based on that, it was theorized that Helen had attempted to escape her attacker. So she tried to run up this embankment, but she was overpowered, dragged back down, and then murdered.
How many times have you seen something like that in a movie or a TV show, you know?
Yeah, a lot of times.
How terrifying that has to be. To think that you were almost away.
Only to be grabbed and pulled back down.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of people have dreams like that, where they're either, running up a hill and they just can't get it. They're sliding back. It means something. I can't remember. My wife has that.
Yeah.
Every now and then. I don't think she has one where she's being pulled or dragged back down. But
she just can't crest.
She just can't, no matter what she does, she can't get to the top of this hill.
Right.
And as with Patricia and Jemima, Helen had been on her period at the time of her murder. Her sanitary pad was found lying underneath her left arm. The postmortem examination found Helen had been raped, and she'd sustained a deep bite mark on her upper right thigh. But this time, forensic evidence was found in the form of semen left on Helen's stockings by her killer. And tragically, Gibbs, she had been within sight of her own home when she was murdered. According to the Scottish Herald, with the first victim, Patricia Docker, investigators didn't find any viable leads. They appealed widely for information from the public, but Patricia's murder went unsolved. When Jemima McDonald was murdered 18 months later, the circumstances of her death were strikingly similar. Both women had failed to return home after attending the Barrowland. Their killer had beaten and strangled them to death with a ligature before stealing the women's handbags. Both victims had also been sexually assaulted, and both were on their period. But despite these similarities, initially, both murders were not considered to be linked.
Which I don't understand.
I'm having trouble with it as well. Obviously, when you bring in the third murder,
right,
I think then it becomes crystal clear. But to me, it's pretty clear with the two murders. Now, they are 18 months apart, but the Barrowland, the rape, the beating, the strangulation,
right.
Both women were on their period. I mean, there's just the similarities are hard to get past. While eyewitnesses to Jemima's murder were able to describe the appearance of the man she left with, no one recognized him. It wasn't clear whether he was a local or a visitor to the area, though he did seem to know the area. So that would probably lean towards someone who either lived in that area or at the very least around it, was very familiar, frequented that area quite often. However, the description of the man was detailed enough that following Jemima's murder, a composite drawing was distributed to Scottish media for national publication. And it was said, Gibbs, that this was the first time this had ever occurred in Scotland. Hundreds of tips poured in from the public who claimed they recognized the man, but none of these tips led to the killer. And again, this is something that you see in a lot of cases. Once that composite comes out, I think a lot of people can look at a picture, a drawing, and see someone they know.
Oh, for sure.
It's not a photograph. It's much different. I think your mind works differently. If I see a photograph and somebody says, "Is this Gibby?" Well, obviously I know if it's you or not.
Right.
But if somebody draws a picture, okay, does it kind of look like you? Maybe. Can I say it's you? No. Am I going to call the police and say it's you?
Yes.
Probably.
Anything for a little Saturday night fun.
Just the knowledge that police are going to knock on your door and ask you a few questions.
Yeah.
It's worth it.
It was funny the first time. The second time was like, still a little funny, but
15 years later, it's getting real old.
It really is, yeah.
According to the BBC, Scottish police made public appeals at the Barrowland for information, while at the same time, they were conducting a covert operation to see if they could flush out this man. But they came up empty-handed. The publicity around the murders meant that patrons of the Barrowland were very aware of the police presence, which kept a lot of people away. I think not only police presence, but when it's reported that two people who visited the Barrowland were murdered. Okay, if we're going out dancing, I'm going to the Majestic.
Yeah.
I'm not going to the Barrowland.
I'm just going to avoid it for now.
Do I know that somebody is specifically targeting females at the Barrowland? No. Do I want to take that chance? Absolutely not.
No way.
Now, eventually, the taxi driver who had driven Helen, her sister Jean, and their male companion home came forward. The driver said he dropped off Helen and the mystery man around 1 a.m. on Earl Street, not far from where Helen lived. But probably the best lead detectives got was the description provided by Helen's sister Jean, who had interacted with her sister's killer. Jean told police the man was slender, well-dressed, around 25 to 30 years old. He had neat auburn reddish hair and was around 5'10". She also said that he had distinctive crooked front teeth. He'd been dressed in a white shirt, a well-cut blue Reed and Taylor brand suit with a badge on the lapel. According to the book Scottish Murder Stories by author Molly Whittington Egan, Jean told police the man talked about frequenting pubs in Glasgow's Yoker district and spoke about working in a laboratory. Jean remembered the man saying his name was either John Templeton, John Simpleson, or John Emerson.
So John something.
John something, either a ton or a son at the end of it. Jean told detectives that at the end of the night, as the group was leaving the Barrowland, this man referred to it as an adulterous den of iniquity.
Wow. I haven't heard that word in a long time.
No, because a lot of people don't talk like that. He commented that married women who attended the dance hall were adulterous. So to me, that is very odd. This guy went there, I'm assuming with the intention of having fun, but then kind of talks about the place in what I guess you would have to call not so quite nice of terms.
Right.
But then to go further and say specifically married women who go to this place were adulterous. Okay, if you hear a guy talking like that and you're a married woman, I think that would be a cause for concern.
Absolutely.
But I don't think it was, because obviously they left with this guy. They got into a taxi with this guy. They must not have taken it that way. Jean said that on the taxi ride home, she noticed this man was well-spoken, but he had a habit of quoting from the Old Testament. He also mentioned that he liked to golf and he didn't drink due to his upbringing, explaining he preferred to pray instead of drinking alcohol. Jean also told detectives that during the taxi ride, this guy's manner made it clear that he was irritated by her presence. She thought he wanted her gone because he wanted to be alone with Helen. And as the journey continued, his disposition changed. He got aggressive, and she said he got moody.
Yeah, I'm wondering if he was aggressive and moody because his frustration just kept growing out of wanting to be alone with Helen without Jean around.
Or his frustration was growing, his anger was growing, this anger that was going to make him do what we know he ultimately does.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's a good question. But when police cross-referenced Jean's description of the man with that provided by bouncers at the Barrowland, they stated the man they saw with Helen was short with black hair. An updated color sketch was released based on Jean's description. But despite Jean's detail about this man having crooked front teeth, gives this critical piece of information, which really probably could have helped with the identification of this man, wasn't included.
You know, it makes me wonder why they left that out. Crooked teeth. Seems like an important detail to include.
Yeah, I think it is. Now, was it an oversight? Was it the fact that the person didn't know how to draw the crooked teeth? I have no idea. Police received a report from a bus driver and a conductor who told investigators they saw a passenger consistent with Jean's description on the night in question. According to the book Scottish Murder Stories, the passenger got off the bus around 2 a.m. at the junction of Dumbarton Road and Gray Street. The man appeared disheveled, like he'd just been in a fight. His jacket was stained with mud, and he had a red mark on his cheek. After he got off the bus at Dumbarton Road and Derby Street, the man walked towards the public ferry, headed across the River Clyde to the south side of Glasgow. And we mentioned it, Gibbs, right? Detectives didn't immediately link Helen's murder. No. And just like we said after the murders of Patricia and Jemima, after Helen's murder, detectives didn't immediately link them all together, despite what you'd have to call remarkable similarities. All three were mothers. Their handbags were missing. The MO was the same, with the victims raped and beaten before being strangled to death by a ligature. And we mentioned it, right? They had all been on their period at the time of their death. Now, the media seized on the religious aspect of the case, dubbing the unknown killer Bible John. According to the Glasgow Evening Times, around 100 detectives worked the case, and we mentioned the fact that this was a huge investigation. That's a lot of detectives.
It is, 100.
They questioned more than 5,000 potential suspects, only 12 months into the investigation. Gibbs, it was said that Helen's sister Jean attended over 300 lineups.
Man, that had to be exhausting.
300. I mean, how many a day?
That's a lot. I mean, I've probably been in, 10 10, 15 lineups.
In the last month, yeah.
I can imagine having to go there and witness that.
But she never saw the face of her sister's killer among any of the men. So 300, how many do you think are in a lineup? At least 6, right?
Yeah.
I would say at least 6 men. At the very least, that's probably 2,400 men she looked at and didn't find her sister's killer.
Eventually maybe that starts to blend too, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think, first of all, you could just get tired.
Right.
Depending on how many of these she's having to go through a day. Investigators canvassed every single business and institution, hairdressers, tailors, taxi drivers, and dentists. I'm sure they worked the dentist angle, looking for patients who had, very crooked front teeth. One of the big problems they had was getting witnesses from the Barrowland to come forward. The man known as Castle Milk John never came forward. And, eventually the case went cold.
Oh, if you can't get witnesses to come out and speak to you, makes it rough.
Yeah, it always does. Now, is there a reason that some of these people would not want to come forward? I'm going to throw something out at you. If I was someone who was at the Barrowland on one of the nights of these murders, I don't have any information really.
Right.
I wasn't involved in the murder. Do I really want to come forward knowing that there's a pretty sadistic rapist murderer on the loose? Do I want my name to accidentally get around as having talked to police?
Probably not.
I'm just saying that I do think sometimes there are things to consider,
right,
that people do consider when they're making that decision. Do I come forward and tell the police I was there that night or not?
Well, there's a good chance you might not want to, especially when we dive into one of the theories in a little bit.
I do think it's very strange that Castle Milk John never came forward.
Yeah.
I can't imagine he didn't know that police were wanting to talk to him. Now, running through his mind maybe was, they're going to think I had something to do with this.
Right.
Or maybe all 3 of them.
Maybe he wasn't supposed to be at the Barrowland that night.
Yeah, he could have very different reasons for not wanting to come forward.
True.
Maybe he was married. He doesn't want his wife to know where he was at. Who knows? In 1983, a 35-year-old man contacted the police. According to the Glasgow Evening Times, the man claimed his friend was Bible John. This man told detectives the pair had both regularly attended the Barrowland at the time of the murders, but he didn't realize until reading a newspaper article in 1978 that his friend, who he said used to dress well, may be the killer. So this man passed his suspicions on to the police, but they didn't believe him. The same newspaper reported that this man was later found living in the Netherlands. So I have no idea what this means as it relates to whether or not this man could have been Bible John. What I do know is that nothing really ever came out of it. It's going to be hard for something to come out when you don't believe the person who's telling you the tip or giving you the tip.
Right.
I think the fact that by 1983, this guy's living in the Netherlands, it doesn't really mean anything. What I would like to know is why police didn't believe this guy. And there could have been a very valid reason. I just never saw it. According to the Daily Record, the killer's profile indicated that his desire to carry out violent acts wasn't limited to inflicting harm on others. After reviewing men who had died by suicide in the years following the murders, investigators decided in 1996 to exhume the body of a man named John McInnes. McInnes had taken his own life in 1980 at the age of 41. Now, this guy hadn't initially been a suspect, but it was said that one of his cousins was. A DNA sample was extracted from McInnes's exhumed remains for comparison with semen samples found on Helen Puttock's stockings. The test came back inconclusive, and after Scotland's most senior state prosecutor determined there was insufficient evidence linking McInnes with Helen's murder, the dead man was officially cleared of any involvement.
It sounds like the investigators thought they had something for a short period of time.
But here's something that I struggle with. I get that there's insufficient evidence. How does that translate into clearing someone of involvement? The tests were inconclusive. How does that clear anyone? I never understand that.
Right.
And we have seen that in a number of cases.
Doesn't say they did it, but doesn't say they didn't do it. So how do you...
But you're coming out and saying they didn't do it.
Exactly.
I just don't get it. In 2004, police started testing the DNA of a select group of men in custody in the hope that they could find a genetic link to the semen sample. One man arrested on a petty offense provided a sample that was said to have been an 80% match. So, as it was reported, this meant the man was likely related to the person who left that semen sample. The problem is, Gibbs, there really wasn't much else about it. I'm not sure if the police made any further inquiries. I don't know how far they took it.
But pretty close, 80%.
Yeah, 80%. Now, this is 2004.
Right.
Today, this sounds to me like the genetic genealogy that is being used to solve so many cases. But unfortunately, there just wasn't much in the research about follow-up.
Yeah.
In 2005, it emerged that a man named John Edgar, who bore a resemblance to the police sketch, had been arrested following an argument with a young woman in the Barrowland during the time frame of the murders. When Edgar was taken to the hospital for stitches, following this altercation, he gave hospital staff a fake name of John White before escaping while his handcuffs were removed. When Edgar voluntarily provided a DNA sample, more than 35 years later, he was ruled out as Bible John.
Well, they're just looking at everybody, it seems like.
Well, and they should be. I mean, this seems like some pretty good police work to me. It didn't pan out. I'm still going back to this 80% match, and then, we just don't find anything else about it.
Right. I mean, you have to assume that there was nothing else to follow up on. That's why we haven't heard anything, but.
Yeah, and maybe we'll talk about it at the end, but it seems like with the way technology is today, they should be able to go back.
Yeah.
And maybe look at this again. In 2007, investigators launched Operation Anagram to research the background of convicted serial killer Peter Tobin and compare his movements to a number of unsolved murders in Britain. Tobin was born in Scotland and met his first wife at the Barrowland in 1968. After marrying, the couple moved from Glasgow to Brighton on the south coast of England in 1969. They lived there for the next 20 years and then moved between Brighton and Glasgow. Between 1991 and 2006, Tobin murdered a teenage girl and two young women in southeast England. He also drugged and raped two 13-year-old girls.
What a monster.
So Gibbs, I think a lot of people, if you look online, kind of go through forums and read what people are thinking, a lot of them are thinking that Tobin is a good possible suspect. He was in his early 20s at the time of the Barrowland murders.
So he was in the area?
Yeah, we know he was in the area. I think age range wise, he's in there.
Sure.
20, 25 to 30, to 35. People don't really always do real well with ages when they give descriptions. I mean, we just said he lived in Glasgow. He met his first wife at the Barrowland. More circumstantial evidence came to light when it emerged that all three of Tobin's ex-wives later told police that he regularly choked, assaulted, and raped them during their marriages. But one of the most compelling pieces of circumstantial evidence incriminating him were the claims made by his ex-wives that if they were on their period when Tobin wanted to have sex, this drove him into a rage, resulting in physical violence.
Well, this could explain why these three victims were beaten so savagely. Maybe Bible John during his attack, once he found out they were on their period, just went into a rage.
According to the Scotsman, Tobin was a religious man who went by as many as 40 different aliases. One, which was said to have been John Semple. And if we go back to Helen's sister Jean, that sounds very similar to one of the names that she said Bible John gave her.
Yeah, I think she said, John Simpleton?
Yeah. Well, and a guy that goes by 40 different aliases might just add a TON onto one.
Of course. That's a lot of aliases.
Sure. Not as many as you have, but it's a lot.
It is. Thank goodness I have that app on my phone.
The alias generator?
Yes.
Now, there are some reasons why Peter Tobin might not be the killer. He was living in Brighton at the time the murders were committed. Also, Tobin concealed the bodies of his victims by burying them. So obviously much different. Bible John left the bodies of his victims out in the open, in public places. He had to have known, Gibbs, they were going to be discovered very, very quickly. Tobin had much different hair than what Bible John has in the police sketch. Investigators ran Tobin's DNA against the semen sample. The problem is the sample had degraded over time.
It's an old sample.
It is. It also was said that it wasn't appropriately preserved, but there was enough data to conclude that it wasn't a match to Tobin. But this degradation of the semen sample might make it hard to do what I suggested, which, was to use this kind of genetic genealogy to figure out the family and then narrow down to the actual perpetrator. They might have a tough time doing it.
Well, maybe one day they're going to have the science behind it to regenerate the DNA. That would be great.
Hey, I don't rule out anything.
Some pretty smart people out there.
People come up with amazing things all the time. When Helen's sister, Jean, was shown photos of Tobin, she was sure that he was not the same man she encountered on the night Helen was killed. So I think when you take everything and put it together, he doesn't seem likely.
Bad individual? Yes. But like you said, doesn't seem likely to be Bible John.
And I think investigators believe that and have eliminated him as a suspect. Over the years, multiple women have reported being sexually assaulted by men they'd met at the Barrowland in the late 1960s. In 2007, it emerged that one woman named Hannah Martin alleged she was assaulted by a man she met at the dance hall in April of 1969, is detailed in the book The Lost British Serial Killer by criminologist David Wilson. The attack left Hannah pregnant, and she gave birth to a baby girl in January 1970. Hannah's father forced her to give the baby up for adoption and kicked her out of the house. Helen Puttock's sister, Jean, died in September 2010. She had been the only living person believed to have come face to face with this perpetrator known as Bible John. In his 2013 book, Dancing with the Devil, former police officer Paul Harrison alleged that Bible John was never apprehended because he was a police officer. And he also claimed investigators were aware of this fact back then. Bouncers at the Barrowland reported that a man who regularly attended showed other patrons a warrant card, which is the Scottish equivalent of police ID. There was another theory that the killer was enlisted in the armed forces and he couldn't be located because he was out of the country. But even distributing the composite sketch to British armed forces bases worldwide didn't help. It was as though Bible John had disappeared into thin air. Harrison told the Daily Record he knows who the man is and where he lives, but for now is unable to name him publicly.
What a strange statement.
Well, it's interesting.
Yeah.
And also strange. I would use that word as well. So to me, it really comes down to two things. He either does have really good evidence
Right.
of who the killer is, but not enough evidence that he feels comfortable publicly naming this guy. You know, if you name somebody as a killer, you're really putting yourself out there.
You better be able to back it up.
And you're opening yourself up for a great deal of liability. I
Sure.
get that. I think the alternative is he has a hunch of who it is and therefore doesn't really have evidence, nowhere near enough evidence to give somebody's name.
Well, hopefully one day he'll come forward.
Well, at the time he gave the interview to the Daily Record, obviously this man was alive because he said he knows where he lives. But Gibbs, this case is well over 50 years old.
Yeah.
So, you know, just based on that, you would think the perpetrator would be somewhere between 70, 80 to maybe even 85 years old.
Right.
If they were still alive.
So maybe he is still alive, and until he passes, the guy's going to stay quiet.
Well, once someone dies, I think your liability changes somewhat
Sure.
in saying certain things about them. Now, one of the things investigators looked at the time was whether any of the victims were murdered by their partners. And you would expect that. That should be the first person or one of the first individuals that the police look at.
Right.
Patricia Docker's ex-husband provided a solid alibi. He was excluded. Helen's husband, too, was excluded early on, although it really wasn't said what that was based on. There was nothing to suggest that Helen and George were, you know, having marital problems or anything like that. And then we always have to explore the possibility that more than one killer was operating in Glasgow at the time, preying on women at the Barrowland. I don't know if you can completely discount that theory because I don't believe, Gibbs, everybody 100% believes that all of these murders are linked. There's one theory that the same individual killed Jemima McDonald and Helen Puttock, but that Patricia Docker's killer was someone completely different. Investigators have received some criticism for what some people have called tunnel vision in focusing on only the theory of a single perpetrator. But I kind of understand in this case why they believe all three women were killed by the same person.
Yeah.
I find it hard to believe that they weren't.
Yeah, same here. It all adds up to me that they would be.
Now, police all the time are criticized for tunnel vision.
Sure.
Most of the time when we talk about it, it's because they've locked in on a suspect very, very early on to the exclusion of looking at other people, which is bad. But in this case, I have a hard time disagreeing with the single killer theory.
I agree with you. It seems the most logical.
Now, what I do find extremely interesting is that Bible John is not believed to be responsible for any further known murders throughout Scotland or Britain. It's hard for me to believe that a man like this, who committed the rapes and murders he did in the way that he did, would just all of a sudden say, nope, that's it. I'm not going to do that anymore.
Yeah, I'm good now.
Yes, I find that hard to believe based on all the research that you and I have done on serial killers. That's definitely not the norm.
It makes you think that either he moved on somewhere else, or he was arrested on something, or he died.
Well, and I think the other thing that ran through my mind was that could he have kept doing the same thing, maybe not targeting women at the Barrowland,
Right. Switched it
up, not quoting Bible verses because the paper was calling him Bible John,
Right.
changed up his MO a little bit, and then it would be much tougher, I think, for police to link this killer with those three murders.
Yeah.
Because everything would be so different.
Yeah.
He could have moved somewhere and kept doing it. And then again, it would have been harder to put together as well.
Very true.
We mentioned it, over 50 years have passed, but the investigation remains open. Some detectives still maintain that someone in the killer's inner circle, knows what he's done, knows who he is, but is protecting him.
Well, of course, that's a possibility.
That's always a possibility. But again, given the age, given how many years have passed, every year it's more and more likely that this killer is no longer alive. And every year it's more and more likely that anybody who would have known what he did is no longer alive. That's just how time works. According to the Daily Record, as recently as late 2021, there was a movement with other potential persons of interest when updated versions of the police sketch were released to the public. Dozens of tips were received. Police were told about one man who regularly attended Glasgow's dance halls, was religious, and worked in a Glasgow laboratory before moving to Dublin. But police found out that this man took his own life in the mid-1970s. So could he be Bible John? Possibly.
Yeah. Now we know why he stopped. If it was him.
If it was him. You know, even if this killer is dead, and there's a good chance that he is after all the time that has passed, it's nice to know that this investigation is still open. It's nice to know that as recently as late last year, there was movement. I don't know the viability of, that semen sample and what they can pull as far as DNA. Could they now get into some of this genetic genealogy that's being used? Possibly.
Well, hopefully they'll give it a shot.
Yeah, what you want to see is, a resolution for the victims' families. Right. They had children. Those children haven't seen any justice.
No.
For their mothers. They were left to grow up without their mothers. It's a brutal case. And there's no doubt, Gibbs, that whoever this guy is, he was a nasty, or still is, a nasty individual. I find it very hard to believe that after 3 rapes and murders that he committed in the brutal way that he did, that he would voluntarily stop.
Right.
I just find that very hard to believe.
Then you have the fact that probably in his mind, he justified his murders because of his religious beliefs.
I think you're on the right track. I think in his mind he did.
Right.
If you have any information on the murders of Patricia Docker, Jemima McDonald, or Helen Puttock, you can make an anonymous report to Crime Stoppers UK at 0800-555-111. So that's it, Gibbs, for our episode on the unsolved Bible John murders. It's an old case, but like we said, there's some amazing technology.
Sure is.
That we have now. There will be amazing technology that comes out within the next 5 years, 10 years. I am more hopeful today than when we first started this podcast, that some of these older cases are eventually going to be solved. The technology is going to come around.
Sure, we're seeing it now.
Something's going to come out.
Yeah.
We got some voicemails. You want to check those out?
Let's hear them.
Hi, Mike and Gibby. My name's Heather. I'm from Perth, Australia. However, originally from South Africa. So, Gibby, I'd love you to do my accent. I love you guys. I've been listening to all your podcasts for a couple of months. Mike, you've got the perfect voice to tell us all about murder and crime and keep my attention. Gibby, however, I think your voice is perfect for bedtime stories. Love your interjections. Always give me a good giggle. Keep up the good work, guys. Really love listening to your channel. And keep your own time ticking.
I'll have to do my South Africa accent next time we do a South African case.
Well, how does that help her? She wanted you to try to do her accent, and you're not obliging.
She has to wait.
She hit the nail on the head, though, because, after we record, I get a little sleepy.
Yep.
And you always tell me a bedtime story. It puts me right to sleep.
I know.
And then you leave and go home.
It works like, melatonin.
60% of the time, it works every time.
Exactly.
Hello, Team Mike. This is Allison, and I'm calling from New Brunswick, Canada. Have been listening to your podcast for probably almost 2 years now, and love listening to you guys. You guys are hilarious. Love the shows. that you're playing. A lot of stuff has been very interesting to me, and I'm wondering if you are interested in a couple of old cases that are here in New Brunswick, Canada. Noel Winters from 1990, 91, and Alan Legier. Anyway, I thought you might be interested in having a look at both of those, or either one of those, and doing some little blurb on them. I know what's going on with those two, but the rest of the world might like to understand your perspective of it. Anyway, keep heading a swivel, and talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Yeah, we'll have to check those two cases out.
Yeah, those are probably solved cases, I believe. I was probably meant for TCAT, but
Yeah.
I put it on unsolved. But yeah, we'll definitely check them out.
Oh my God, it's Virginia yet again. There's so much I want to say to y'all, but then you get on here and you're like, you just freeze up. So I listen to y'all's podcast whenever I'm transporting, my son, his friends, whatever. But they get so tired of it. And I'm like, look, y'all need to sit here and listen to what they're saying, because you need to be aware. You need to know what is going on around you. Because half the time these kids now are so in their phones that you know what? You could come up and cut a lock of their hair and they wouldn't even know. And that's terrifying. And he's 8, and I just really, really try to hammer it home to him. You have to be aware of your surroundings. I'm only 38, but times when I was growing up, it's not like it is now, and it's terrifying. And that's all I wanted to say. So thank y'all for all y'all do. He does like y'all's podcast better than some other ones, because at least he gets into it, because he says you are funny. And he is King Gibby, so sorry, it is what it is. Bye now.
It is what it is. It always is what it is. I agree. I mean, the phone thing, and I've mentioned it to you before, Gibbs. I've gotten out of the car, let's say at the mall or at some parking lot. My wife gets out, my daughters get out, they shut the door, they're walking, and they're looking in their phone.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, if I'm not here, who is looking out? Who's got their head on a swivel?
Yeah.
Nobody.
What happened to what I've taught you?
Yeah. And I talk about it all the time. So I do think it's important. I'm not obsessive about it, because maybe I talk about it too much. People think that I'm just walking around swiveling, but I always know when I get out of the car who's parked next to me, what's going on behind me, and I'm scanning.
I've seen you, man. You're moving your head. You're shuffling your feet.
I'm doing a little dance.
Yeah. Kind of look like John Belushi in that Animal House when he's sneaking up around it.
He was sneaky.
Yeah.
All right. That is it for another episode of True Crime All the Time Unsolved. So for Mike
and Gibby,
stay safe and keep your own time ticking.
All this month, stream the funniest films for free on Pluto TV. Watch comedy classics like Anchorman, The Legend of Ron Burgundy, and Mean Girls. Or drop in for a Tyler Perry marathon with a Medea family funeral and Medea's witness protection. Pluto TV also has hundreds of channels and thousands of movies and TV shows like Get Shorty, Be Cool, Key and Peele, Comedy in Color, and more. And no contracts, no subscriptions, no fees, no joke. So download the Pluto TV app on your favorite streaming device and start laughing today. Pluto TV, drop in, watch free.